Okay, Simon, let's kickstart these here reviews. Let's talk about Bad Boys first. A little sorbet before we get to something good.
Mike, there's a storm coming. Things are going to get bad. We're going to be tested. Just know we're good.
I am sensing from your derision of all things mentioned so far on the podcast about Bad Boys that you are not a fan of this franchise. I was a
Look,
fan, the first film.
sorry, Simon. Sorry, I'd like to say it's been smack talk mostly from me. I saw the first one in the cinemas. I remember mostly liking it. I was like 15 at the time, and like that's peak Bad Boys. Like that's when you should be digging that film.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the second one, and I don't remember a single thing from that second one, but I have fondness for it. I think. I'm sure if I saw it again, I'd be like, yeah, I get this. I don't remember hating it, but I never saw the third one, and the fourth one is just a non-event for me culturally. But certainly, I wish people well who are excited by this.
It comes many years after the third one, which I have no recollection of at all. I know that there was a third one, but I don't know if I saw it because it was a Mission Impossible situation for me because I really liked the first one. The first film I saw a couple of times. It had Joey Pants doing his big screamy police boss performance. It had Martin Lawrence and Will Smith riffing on each other with a kind of comedic energy that sometimes we recapture in this podcast. And you had Taya Leone, who was young and hot and funny and held her own amongst this real boys club kind of thing in a Michael Bay film before Michael Bay became the Michael Bay that we hated. There was excess, but it was done with a lot of energy and a lot of skill, neither of which have been recaptured in this fourth film. None of which, I should say, has been recaptured in this fourth film. Having said that, I want to go back to the Mission Impossible analogy. I hated Mission Impossible 2 and I hated Bad Boys 2, whereas I liked Mission Impossible 1 and I hated Mission Impossible 2. So that's the sort of the analogy there. As we get to the fourth stage of this aging franchise, these boys have been thrown back together at interesting times in their career. Martin Lawrence doesn't really have a lot going for them other than a reputation from his Martin sitcom days and some films which have not aged well and which nobody remembers with any fondness. And I say nobody. I know he's got a fan base, but let's face it, he's Martin Lawrence. And Will Smith, probably even more so, is coming from a very sort of damaged career position following the Oscar slap, which is referenced in this film. And got a few knowing nods from the audience I saw it with saying, okay, that's Will trying to sort of refresh his brand a bit and sort of take the edge off that horrible moment. It kind of works. If you're already seeing this film, you're probably already back on board the Will Smith wagon. I'm not, but I like some of the Bad Boy stuff, so I went and saw this movie. It's open big, so maybe legacy franchise sequels aren't dead in the water. This has done some big numbers around the world, harkening back to just the most basic of 80s/90s action plot lines, the kind of which really wouldn't cut muster even in an hour-long TV show now, but they've somehow managed to bulk it out into this very splashy Miami set adventure in which the Joey Pants character, Joe Pantalato's police captain, who died at the end of the last film apparently, is framed for horrible things, corruption primarily, and it's up to the Bad Boys to kind of take on the corrupt Miami police force and the corrupt Miami politicians and the drug cartels that they're working with.
Sorry, Simon, can I ask a question? Sorry,
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I don't understand it. So is Joey Pan's character actually dead? Is this like a flashback sort of a thing for the fourth film? Is that how that's going?
One of the most awkward moments in this film is when Martin Lawrence has a near-death experience and he visits some kind of afterworld in which Joey Pants says to him, "It's not your time." Excuse me. And it creates a moment in the film that is harkened back to throughout the narrative in which Martin Lawrence believes he can't get killed. And so he just wanders out in front of machine gun fire, and it's up to Will Smith to try to rein in his I guess, kind of immortal thoughts he has about himself. It's a stupid way to introduce.
So Simon, can I just confirm?
He's in there.
Can I confirm, because I stopped paying attention? The answer was just yes.
Joey Pants does make an appearance in the film from another realm. So yes,
okay,
that's exactly right. It's a longbow to pull. There are several longbows pulled in this movie. The upside of it all is that some of the action is pretty good. It features the same two young directors who apparently did the last Bad Boys film, and they know how to handle an action sequence in a kind of handheld, throw the camera around, let's save it all in the editing room kind of way, not with the very assured hand that Michael Bay first explored in that first film, but then sort of lost his mojo a little bit with some wild and silly stuff. I kind of enjoyed seeing them back together, just doing their thing, but it's very sort of one note and rote and feels very much like a legacy sequel for the fans. So the fact that this is open as big as it has suggests that maybe this fan base was solid, and that 1 or 2 weeks at the top of the box office will be reason enough to justify this film and maybe drag a fifth film out of the pair of them. But it's a pretty low bar at this stage in the Bad Boys franchise.
Yeah, just throwing it out there. The last Bad Boys film, which Simon has no recollection of, just shows how out of touch he was, as that was the biggest film of 2020.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. They've got a following, and
sorry, Simon. I like that you just rolled with that without ignoring the massive asterisk next to it, which was shortly after the release of that movie, the entire world shut down due to COVID.
Well, yes, that was the big asterisk afterwards. Really, was it that recent? 2020 was the last Bad Boys film.
Yeah, because the film came out. The film came out in like January or February of that year, which is never a sign of huge faith. But the film performed pretty well, and then everything got shut down, and so just by default, it was like the biggest film of the year, which I just think is hilarious.
Wow. I don't have. Yeah, that is funny. Yes, that it was
the other thing,
title, despite nobody being in cinemas.
The other thing just to keep in mind as well is that, two other things. One, did Will Smith's slap adventure end up actually damaging his career? Because this is the first proper film out since the slap, and it doesn't seem like that's damaged his career at all. So is this an issue of, just industry concern and scuttlebutt over nothing at all, ultimately? Because audiences clearly don't care. Like, they've turned out for this. It's not even a thing. So that's just interesting to consider.
It must have been a thing for them to feel like they had to include the sequence in the film, which is basically Will Smith being slapped 4 or 5 times and being told to get over it and let's move on, because he has panic attacks during the action sequences in this film and starts to shut down. And I'm starting to wonder if those panic attack sequences he has throughout the film are just a setup for this gag, which helps audiences kind of move on. So it's an awkward scene. There's so much that's awkward about this film in its depiction of friendship and family, and it feels very contrived and very convoluted. But I guess that's the path we go down with this kind of formula.
Yeah, I mean, I'm increasingly just becoming just a strong believer in the idea of never apologize for anything, just keep on going, and eventually people just forget and move on, accept it. There's so much stuff happening in people's lives in the world that, outside of a precious few members of the audience who probably wouldn't even go and see this movie anyway, I don't think anyone cares about that slap, which is just fascinating.
It's interesting that...
Oh, sorry.
It's been. Let me just point out. It's been very controlled in the way that he's done publicity for the film. It's been very carefully chosen journalists that he's spoken to, and clearly conditions have been placed upon the questioning of him as to how that is. So it was probably Emancipation, the Apple TV film that was his King Richard follow-up, that was probably most undone by the incident. But I do agree that at this point, and the Bad Boys following is so Will Smith is our guy kind of thing, that it probably doesn't hurt this franchise, which would suggest it's also a smart move for him to go down to reconnect with this really beloved franchise and try to make a fourth thing where it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, never apologize. The other thing that I thought was kind of a bit interesting when I was hearing about the box office breakdown of the opening weekend in the US, because this film's obviously been out for a week now, was just that the audience were pretty much sort of heavy, sort of, I'm going to use this word, but it's not really accurate anyway, like a minority audience. Okay, so it was a strong Latino turnout, obviously a strong African American audience turnout, and white guys like you and I, Simon, comprised of, barely a quarter of the audience. So I think that for certain sectors of the community, this is a huge cultural event, even if it isn't maybe necessarily touching our button so much.
Yeah, yeah. I'm keen to see how it plays in the weeks ahead, because I think the fans have come out in the first couple of weeks, and whether that it extends beyond that fan base is I'm keen to see.
Anyway, let's move on, Simon.
Nothing much more to talk about. Let's move on, because I think we've fully exhausted any kind of interesting discussion that can be had about Bad Boys Ride or Die.
I mean, some would question if we even achieved that to begin with, but Presumed Innocent, it's a new TV show. It's on Apple TV Plus. It stars our boy Jake Gyllenhaal. Let's watch a clip.
I just want to make sure that we have everything exactly right.
Let's get started.
Are you aware that Carolyn Williams was murdered? When was the last time you were in Carolyn's apartment?
We had cases together. Sometimes we would work after hours at her apartment.
Your fingerprints were found in her bedroom. Were you and Carolyn romantically involved?
My suspect.
Simon, let's get a quick heat check on this one. I referred to Jake Gyllenhaal as our boy. Do you have any sort of strong feelings about Gyllenhaal one way or another? Because I'm not sure that I do.
A fan, always keen to see what he does. His recent Roadhouse thing was a diversion at best, but as he grows into an adult actor, I'm keen to see what he continues to do. And on the evidence of presumed innocence, and I'll let you take it from here, but that's not going to waver. I think he's very good in this.
Yeah, look, I always find him interesting to watch on screen. I don't know I'm ever sort of keen to see him on screen, but like it's always a happy, essentially he's not necessarily selling me a ticket to something, but at the same time, like he's not unselling me on a ticket either. So it was kind of interesting coming to this after I've heard a lot of discussion in the last few weeks about Donnie Darko. I'm not sure why Donnie Darko has suddenly been a zeitgeisty conversational touch point for a number of places I've listened to podcasts from and read articles about. But for some reason, everyone's talking about Donnie Darko. It's not an anniversary at all. Like, it was 2001, so the 25th anniversary is still 2 years away. So not quite sure what sort of got this, but I've been thinking about my relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal and what I've enjoyed of his work over the years and how that sort of shifted and evolved, much in the way that his career has. He came out of the gates with Donnie Darko, and I think everyone kind of assumed that he'd be like either just like a interesting, complicated action, like dramatic star. So I'm just trying to think of probably a good comparison point. I guess sort of we're looking for someone to sort of take the reins from, I guess, maybe where Christian Slater was in the 90s going into the 2000s, making those sort of
a Tobey Maguire about him. I think he was a young actor who impressed on screen, and people were sort of saying, okay, he's bringing something a little bit different, a little bit not so much edgier, because he's still a square-jawed white guy, but
yeah,
he
a bit quirkier.
Doing Bubble Boy, which was funny out of the gate, one of those silly Touchstone or Disney comedies.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that was just like a bit of an aberration.
And then Moonlight Mile came along, and he impressed in that, and October Sky. So he made some smart, like, impressive choices, even if they didn't sort of connect at the box office. They showed that he was an actor who was serious about his craft and serious about the people he worked with, and that I think that's moved right through his career.
Yeah. And so, look, we get to 2024 where he's got these two productions. There's Roadhouse, which you mentioned earlier in the piece. I was a much bigger fan of Roadhouse than you are. I think the difference with our approaches to Roadhouse is that you, as a sober man, probably didn't have a drink in your hand when you were watching Roadhouse. And I think that makes all the difference for that film.
That is a huge talking point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It almost drove me back to drink, actually.
Yeah, big mistake for two reasons. One, not drinking, and also two, you don't want to get back on the wagon or off the wagon. I don't know how the wagon works. So,
Well, my wife bought some mouthwash into the house the other day, which I found had 2% alcohol in it. And I lost my mind. I was flipping out. I said, I haven't had alcohol for 10 years. I've become that person, the non-smoker who chastises people who still smoke. That's sort of me, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Simon, enough about you and more about Jake Gyllenhaal. So look, I came to watching Jake Gyllenhaal in this, and it's a very different performance and very different production to Roadhouse, unfortunately. But it's still pretty good. So, don't let the fact it's not Roadhouse dissuade you from watching this very fine production. What I thought was interesting watching this is that Jake Gyllenhaal, with another actor in this role, I don't think the show would be anywhere near as interesting as it is. Because what I think he's doing in this is bring the exact same sort of energy, albeit more of like a buttoned down tone, to what he was doing in Nightcrawler. If people remember Nightcrawler, that's the film about the guy who's filming like chases in Los Angeles and other moments of crime, and eventually starts sort of staging some. And he's very wiry, a little bit coked up, possibly. Yeah. He's on the pills. But he's kind of got that same vibe, but he's a professional man here and he's a bit more buttoned down. But you just kind of get the sense that he's just sort of one wild weekend away from being the Nightcrawler guy again. What we're watching here, it is a remake of the Harrison Ford film from 1990, 91, thereabouts. And where you're watching a Harrison Ford performance, where Harrison Ford is a very buttoned down, very sort of genial, approachable Hollywood dramatic lead, you kind of know what you're getting there, which is a sense of almost stoicism, and you're ready just to buy into anything that he tells you. If he says, I'm innocent, I didn't kill my wife, and then jumps out of a giant pipe, okay, you're like, that man did not kill his wife. He did not, like, you're just willing to go with him. Even though people can't survive that fall, that's ridiculous. But I was going to say, the difference here, the difference here is that you've got Jake Gyllenhaal's bringing Nightcrawler energy to this, and you're watching what is effectively the same story, which is a lawyer who's been accused of killing a co-worker of his that he was also secretly having an affair with, and where you're willing to absolutely buy Harrison Ford as the man who did not kill his co-worker. I'm watching this, and I haven't seen through the last episode, as no critics have yet, and I honestly do not know if this guy has killed a woman or not, because he is a Jake Gyllenhaal weirdo, creepy dude through and through, and I cannot wait to see whether he's actually done this thing.
Great point. And it speaks to exactly what I want to say. I can't remember, maybe about episode 5 or 6 of this, I turned to my lovely wife and I said, I've got to go back and watch the Harrison Ford thing, because I can't imagine Harrison Ford at that point in his career playing the darker shades and the nastier moments the way this presents Jake Gyllenhaal's performance of this. There's you make the exact point that I was thinking at the time. I was thinking, well, he's nasty. He can be. He does have a sort of a short fuse when it comes to dealing with both the women in his life, and we haven't mentioned Ruth Negga yet, and we will, because she's incredible in this.
I think you just did.
Valuable player and she's terrific. But the way Jake Gyllenhaal gives this sort of a razor's edge to how his life is crumbling and how he falls apart. He yells at his kids. He's effectively stalking what we learned to be the victim of the crime, the wonderful Renata Rensve. And so, I was like, this has got to be maybe very closer to Scott Turo's book, which I never read in the day, but I remember Scott Turo being kind of a big deal as an author, sort of the John Grisham of his time. I want to go back and watch the movie, because I don't remember the ending of the movie, so I can't remember who does all the killing in this, and B, it must be an unusually edgy performance for Harrison Ford if it's going to pull off the same kind of vibe.
Yeah, so I think what's important to realize that this is very much an update to 2024. I don't believe Hughes any closer to the book than the movie did originally. I read an interview with the author of the book just a couple of hours ago, and he was just talking about the sexual politics of it being updated quite considerably, as well as people's attitudes around identities and representations of people is quite different. So automatically that's going to put the characters into a different sort of framework than you found in the original movie. Just as a bit of an example, and I'm going to use some language here that I probably otherwise wouldn't, but in like a late 80s, early 90s context, the co-worker who was fairly sort of, I'm going to say sexually promiscuous, words like slut may have been bandied around a little bit more in that sort of, before times period where that's not really necessarily the case now. The conversation's moved on and people's consideration of her as a character is really quite different. So she's a lot more sort of fleshed out as a person as well.
It was Australian actress Greta Scacchi in the film where it's Wrong Person in the World Cannes Best Actress winner Bernarda Rensve here, who is great in the role and plays that modern, strong, decisive woman really, really well here. And we mentioned Ruth Negga as Jake Gyllenhaal's wife. In the original was Bonnie Bedelia, who we know and love from my era, the Die Hard films, and as John McClane's wife. So it's
and from my era, the grandmother in a Parenthood TV series.
That's funny. But it's great casting. Rensve is terrific in this, and the rest of the cast as well. Sarsgaard at times borders a little bit on the over the top. Certainly, the actor whose name eludes me, the British actor who plays the.
Okay, well, Simon, let me get back in here. Okay, just hold back.
Okay, because I
back a little bit.
I binged this. I've been quite keen to talk about this for a while. So yes, do go ahead. I apologise.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, let's address the fact that Simon binged it. I've got a policy of not talking about programs beyond what's available on day one where people are making a choice about watching it. Because the thing with TV is that sometimes it goes for years and years and years. Are you necessarily completing a review just by seeing the end of a season as opposed to the end of year 5? Maybe we should be holding off until 4 seasons into Presumed Innocent. Who can say? There won't be 4 seasons of this, it'll be one and done. Anyhow, amazing supporting cast. As we've discussed, like Jake Gyllenhaal really is holding this together, but he's only really one part of the orchestra that is this series. I don't know why I went for a musical sort of reference there. But you do have Ruth Negga playing the wife, and she's, I think, particularly interesting in this because if you watch a movie, the villain, the wife role, often they get the short shrift and we'll get a couple of like sort of decent, sort of powerful-ish scenes. But what's really great about this is, and if you don't know the story particularly well, the Jake Gyllenhaal character, he's had an affair with his co-worker. His wife knows about this. What she doesn't know is that he's recently slept again with the co-worker just before she died. So there's some greater trust issues that have been really severely damaged. Like, she is angry and pissed off with him. She's still sort of holding by him for the sake of they've got some teenage kids together. But like, there's the anger there. What's great is that you'd watch that in a movie. It's a couple of scenes. In this, you as like the sort of surrogate sort of attachment to Jake Gyllenhaal, you were stuck with Ruth Negga being really angry and pissed off for episodes upon episodes. Like, there's no escaping her and just disappearing to the next scene. Like, this is an ongoing relationship and just runtime alone. Like, it is
in portraying that.
Yeah.
Like her quiet dignity in portraying that anger is just some great acting.
Yeah. Also, other people that have been violated by him is his boss, who stops being his boss at the end of the first episode. That's not that much of a spoiler, don't worry, people. But played by Bill Camp, who's always awesome to watch on screen. You do have Peter Sarsgaard, and he is this fantastic sort of wily jerk co-worker who is desperate to make his name within the prosecutor's office and essentially takes the Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Rusty, was it Rusty Subic? Yeah. Ends up, takes his professional sort of position and the opportunity to not only steal his job, but also maybe send this guy to prison is, something he takes with great glee. And then you've got his boss as well, who seems to be equally just as petty a person, but is maybe slightly more professional in his approach to it all. And people who've watched The Handmaid's Tale would probably know him pretty well, but it's a very different performance. The actor, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, so excuse me on this one, but it's like O.T. Fajbani. There could be like 15 ways of pronouncing it, and I know that what I just said is absolutely not it.
Isn't he?
Yeah. But he's fantastic in this. I really, really enjoyed him, and when he hit like episodes 2 and 3, it stops being the sort of petty guy that you kind of assume he is from the very beginning, and you start seeing a bit more of a fracture in sort of where he's coming at it from. But you've got these really great actors. He has a very unusual delivery in his voice, though. It talks like this a little bit. It talks like it's very disconcerting at first, but it falls into place. But it's also very different to other things I've seen him in, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what he's doing here, but I dig it. But the other element to really talk about with all of this is that this is a David E. Kelley series. David E. Kelley, and look, We talked about it a couple of weeks ago on the show because he had just written the Netflix series A Man in Full. David E. Kelley is a guy who's been writing for TV since the mid-1980s. He knows what he's doing in terms of putting together a script. The issues that you find with David E. Kelley at times is sometimes casting doesn't really sort of quite match sort of what David E. Kelley can do. So sometimes it's just perfectly fine. Like A Man in Full was just like a Hollywood cast and like they performed the script perfectly okay and the show is perfectly okay. But sometimes you can get a David E. Kelley script to really, really sing. And they've absolutely done this in this. And it's just that matter of getting more interesting performers into the roles and just allowing David E. Kelley to explore some just darker, more interesting cultural elements as part of the mix. When he plays it a bit straighter and when he tries to play it a bit more comedically, it's never really quite as engaging. But anyway, David E. Kelley, this is absolutely one of the best things he's done for a few years now, and I'm really into it. Presumed Innocence, it's playing now on Apple TV Plus, runs for 8 weeks, and critics have seen 7 episodes, but not the 8th one. And you know that this is a show that is resonating with people because every single review says, I have not seen the final episode, and I'm keen to see how this ends. If a critic does not care how this ends, they are not putting that into the copy, I assure you.